We were doing everything we could to end what had re-erupted. Picture this, a man carrying the Olympic torch in 1984, thousands cheering, FBI agents protecting him, not because he was an athlete, but because it was George Christie, president of the most notorious motorcycle club in America. The same man who would later walk away from 40 years in the Hells Angels and break their sacred code of silence forever. This is a story of 3 decades of secrets, betrayals, murder conspiracies, FBI stings, and the journey of one man from inside America's most feared criminal organization to exposing it all. This is how George Christie became the most famous former Hells Angel alive. Early life and the pull of the outlaw. Born in Ventura, California in 1947, George Gus Christie Jr. was the son of Greek immigrants who had anglicized their name from Chrysos to Christie. He was an only child, raised in a tight-knit Greek-American community. Christie described himself as timid and sensitive. His parents were loving and protective, and they had no idea their son would one day lead the most notorious motorcycle club in U.S. history. As a teenager, Christie became an avid surfer. Everything changed the day one of his surfing buddies showed up on a Harley-Davidson. Christie knew instantly what he had to do. In 1966, despite his father's objections, he bought his first bike, a 1957 Panhead for $200. After high school, he joined the Marine Corps Reserve and then worked as an electrician and communications troubleshooter for the Department of Defense, a stable, respectable job. Eventually, though, he would abandon it for a far more dangerous life. Christie was unusual among outlaw bikers in that he held a college degree. He married his high school girlfriend, Cheryl, who immigrated from Ontario, Canada. They had 2 children, George III and Moria, but the call of the outlaw life proved too strong to resist. In the late 1960s, Christie joined successive outlaw biker clubs, the Question Marks in Ventura, and then the Satan's Slaves in Los Angeles. He associated with prominent motorcycle customizers, including the legendary Kenny Von Dutch Howard. As Christie later remarked, "Some people run away and join the circus. I ran away and joined the Hells Angels in 1975. At age 28, he became a prospect, enduring tests, humiliations, and challenges to prove his loyalty. The Hells Angels were at the top of outlaw motorcycle culture, and loyalty was everything. In 1976, Christie was initiated as a full-patch member of the Los Angeles County chapter, and within 6 months, he was chapter president. He was rising fast in an organization that valued loyalty above all else. His ambition was greater still. In 1978, he left LA to found the Ventura Charter, becoming its president. He would remain in that post for 33 years, making him the longest-serving charter president in Hells Angels history. Christie said he found in the club what he had long sought. He believed there was a code of honor, despite how outsiders saw them. He later explained, "These were guys I could trust. If I confided in them, told them something, they would not use it against me." The club became his extended family. He could travel anywhere in California and always find shelter, a place to work on his bike, and acceptance. As he put it, it was like one continuous party. Under his leadership, the Ventura chapter became one of the most visible in the country. Christie became the negotiator, the spokesman, the thinker, the yin to Sonny Barger's yang. While Barger was the reckless figurehead and de facto global leader of the Hells Angels, Christie smoothed conflicts and built alliances. In Ventura County, he became a local celebrity, a man who shaped political and economic life. One police officer, Mark Coronado, observed, "People love him. They think he's like a god down here." He cultivated the image of a generous community figure, even while running an outlaw club. The Olympic torch moment. The year 1984 proved pivotal for Christie and the Hells Angels. The Summer Olympics were heading to Los Angeles, and tensions were high. The ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, circulated rumors that the Hells Angels might supply weapons to terrorists to disrupt games at Lake Casitas. Christie viewed these accusations as political sabotage. The ATF was distributing images of him and other members to local businessmen, attempting to damage the club's reputation. Christie's response was bold. He embraced the Olympics. In the Relay's Youth Legacy Kilometer program, individuals or groups could sponsor a kilometer for $3,000, earning the right to carry the torch or appoint someone. The proceeds went to charity. Christie and the Hells Angels sponsored a segment and committed the funds to the Special Olympics in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. On July 20, 1984, Christie carried the Olympic torch through Oxnard, California. He was cheered on by fellow Hells Angels members and hundreds of supporters. Spectators even wore Hells Angels gear, flanked by FBI agents and local police who protected him from rival threats. Christie wore no club insignia that day, saying they did not need extra publicity. That moment transformed Christie's public image. He recast the Hells Angels as patriots, not outlaws. The irony was that ATF's campaign to discredit them ended up drawing them closer to the American public. The FBI sting and trial. Christie's newfound prominence also made him a target. In 1986, the FBI launched an elaborate sting operation involving Thomas Arthur Chaney, a former Ventura Hells Angel turned government informant. The operation used Michael Slim Mulharn, a criminal informant with ties to the Mexican mafia, to approach Christie with a proposal. Mulharn covertly recorded conversations in which Christie allegedly offered him $500 and a 1973 Pontiac to arrange Chaney's murder. To add credibility, the FBI staged Chaney's death in September 1986, even sending a note saying the bodywork has been taken care of to the Ventura clubhouse. On September 25, 1986, Christie met Mulharn in a Ventura motel. He handed him an envelope containing 5 $100 bills and car title. In recordings, Christie said, "I'd do it myself if he were here." Then he stepped onto the balcony to think. Something felt off. He returned to the room and asked Mulharn to return the envelope. Too late. The FBI burst in and arrested him for conspiracy to murder. At his first court hearing, Christie recalled seeing the charge, "The United States of America versus George Christie," the full weight of the nation behind him bearing down. The trial began in April 1987 in federal court. His defense lawyer, Barry Tarlow, argued that the case was retribution, not justice. The prosecution's star witness, Mulharn, had a long criminal record and poor credibility. Christie himself came across as genuine and sincere under testimony. The defense asserted that Mulharn had ulterior motives, claims that the Mexican mafia had their own interest in Chaney's demise, and that Mulharn was using Christie as a convenient scapegoat. Ultimately, Christie was acquitted of all charges. He had bested the mightiest law enforcement institution in the world. Yet he had spent a year detained before trial. The experience transformed his future approach to the law and loyalty, life as the ultimate insider. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Christie consolidated power within the Hells Angels. He served as the club's international spokesman for decades, becoming one of its most authoritative voices. In 1983, the Los Angeles Times featured him, noting a perceived mellowing of the Hells Angels under his influence. When California's Organized Crime Control Commission labeled the Hells Angels as the epitome of outlaw motorcycle gangs, Christie pushed back. He insisted, "We're just a motorcycle club, a family." And that was his narrative as he walked the line between outlaw image and community presence, always pushing the limits, always defending his code. The fall and rebirth of George Christie, Inside the Hells Angels. In 1990, George Christie appeared on 60 Minutes, interviewed by Mike Wallace regarding criminal allegations against the Hells Angels. When Wallace presented internal documents from 1987 that warned members not to betray those involved in drug deals, Christie dismissed them as forgeries created by unknown parties. His fame continued to grow. By 1991, Christie sold the rights to produce a film about his life to a Hollywood studio. The film was set to be directed by Michael Mann, but it was never made. Christie's wife, Cheryl, objected to the way she was portrayed in the script, and the project was shelved. During a visit to Paris, Christie was hosted by Liza Minnelli at a party. He counted movie stars, musicians, artists, and even high-ranking police officers among his friends. But behind the celebrity and glamour, Christie was navigating a world growing more dangerous by the year, a shift in power and direction. In October 1998, when Sonny Barger relocated to Arizona, Christie reportedly assumed control over the day-to-day operations of the Hells Angels in California. He saw firsthand how the club was shifting, from a brotherhood of rebels to a more organized, militaristic, and business-focused operation. Drug trafficking became more structured. Violence grew calculated and strategic. What had once been a countercultural movement was turning into a criminal enterprise with a corporate mindset. That same year, Christie was indicted on 59 charges related to drug distribution. Police wiretaps had captured conversations involving Vicodin and methamphetamine sales. In one recording, a Hells Angels member claimed the club controlled the local drug trade in Ventura County. Christie spent a year in prison and eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute prescription drugs and filing a false tax return. The indictment also implicated members of his family, including his ex-wife Cheryl, his son George Christie III, his daughter Moria, and her husband Lane Bell. The breaking point. By the late 1990s, Christie had grown disillusioned with the direction the Hells Angels were heading. The club he had once joined for its brotherhood and code of honor was changing into something he no longer recognized. Known for being a peacemaker, Christie played a major role in ending a long-standing war between the Hells Angels and the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, which had begun in 1969. In March 1999, he hosted a delegation of outlaws at the Ventura Clubhouse for peace talks. It was a diplomatic move typical of Christie's leadership. He believed constant conflict was bad for business and would ultimately destroy the club. However, not everyone appreciated his approach. Some members viewed his willingness to negotiate with rival clubs as weakness, or worse, betrayal. In 2007, tensions exploded when Molotov cocktails were thrown into two Ventura tattoo shops, Scratch the Surface and Twisted Ink, which were believed to have ties with the Mongols Motorcycle Club, a longtime rival. Christie was charged with conspiracy to commit arson. Prosecutors alleged he conspired to intimidate the shop owners into shutting down. Christie maintained that the incident stemmed from poor decisions by others in the club, not direct orders from him. But it was becoming clear that the club's values had shifted in ways he could no longer support. The exodus and excommunication. After 40 years in the Hells Angels, Christie made a final decision. In 2011, he attended a meeting and publicly announced his retirement. In an interview with Vice, he explained, "I felt we had become the very people we were rebelling against. At one point, we interacted with every club up and down the coast. By 2011, we were at war with nearly every major outlaw motorcycle club in the U.S., along with law enforcement. The original spirit of the outlaw lifestyle had been lost. It started to look more like a military campaign with one army fighting another, he said. But leaving the Hells Angels isn't simple. Within 2 weeks of his announcement, Christie was labeled out bad, a term used for excommunicated members. He was banned from wearing the club's insignia and even told to remove his death head tattoo. After 4 decades of loyalty, the club he had dedicated his life to cast him out entirely. In 2013, Christie was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for his alleged role in the 2007 tattoo shop firebombing. He served his time at FCI La Tuna in Anthony, Texas, and was released in 2014. Breaking the code of silence once out of prison and out of the club, Christie made a decision that stunned the outlaw motorcycle world. He would speak out. In 2015, he starred in Outlaw Chronicles, Hells Angels, a 6-part documentary series on the History Channel. For the first time, a high-ranking former member was revealing the club's inner workings on national television. Each episode presented stories Christie had never told publicly about internal rules, the initiation process, club finances, loyalty, betrayal, and the high cost of the lifestyle. Breaking the Hells Angels' code of silence is dangerous. Retaliation against so-called rats is not uncommon. But Christie believed the truth mattered more. In 2016, he published a memoir titled Exile on Front Street, My Life as a Hells Angel and Beyond. It was an unflinching look at the realities of outlaw biker life. Christie was honest about his own involvement in the drug trade, his legal troubles, and the emotional cost of living outside the law. The book earned praise for its raw honesty and depth. Christie soon began working as a consultant on organized crime for CNN and appeared at conferences and legal events. He also developed a one-man show titled Outlaw, which he performed in cities including Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and St. Louis. He now consults with defense attorneys and first-time offenders, helping them navigate the justice system. He speaks regularly on crime, prison reform, and motorcycle culture. The personal cost. Christie's choice to break away from the Hells Angels and speak out came at a high personal cost. He lost the brotherhood that had defined his identity for decades. Friends became enemies. He became a pariah in the world he had once ruled. In 2015, tragedy struck when his son, George Christie III, died unexpectedly in his sleep at the age of 39. George III had followed his father's path, becoming vice president of the Ventura chapter, before eventually leaving the club himself. Christie's first marriage ended in divorce. Many family members were caught up in his legal issues over the years. Children of outlaw bikers often inherit the consequences of their parents' choices. George III had followed his father's path, becoming vice president of the Ventura chapter, before eventually leaving the club himself. Christie's first marriage ended in divorce. Many family members were caught up in his legal issues over the years. Children of outlaw bikers often inherit the consequences of their parents' choices. Since 2002, Christie has been married to Nikki Nicoletto. They live with their youngest son, Finn, in Southern California. He has 3 surviving adult children and has tried to live a more peaceful life, far from the violence and lawlessness of his past. But the past is never far behind. Christie still receives death threats and must remain vigilant. The tattoos covering his body serve as permanent reminders of who he was, whether he wishes to forget or not. The last American outlaw. George Christie calls himself the last American outlaw. He represents the end of an era when motorcycle clubs were about rebellion, freedom, and brotherhood, not business, violence, and organized crime. By exposing the Hells Angels from the inside, he did something unprecedented. He dismantled both the myth and the reality of one of the most secretive organizations in America. Anyone who thinks war, any kind of war, is romantic has never been in one, Christie said. His story is ultimately about the cost of loyalty and the courage to tell the truth. He gave 40 years of his life to a club that cast him aside the moment he no longer fit the narrative. But by breaking their code of silence, Christie reclaimed his own voice. Today, he continues to share his knowledge of biker culture, criminal justice, and reform. Once seen as a symbol of American rebellion, Christie has now become something else, a symbol of redemption, transformation, and the power of telling your own story.